excited about. If you remember a little bit earlier in the year, we did Women of the Bible. And as it is everybody's favorite month, October, which means it is Reformation month, we are starting to talk about the women of the Reformation. They have some weird names. So bear with me as I attempt to pronounce their names. I've looked it up. We'll see if I can get them. So we're going to first do the briefest background on the Reformation I can possibly manage, because we have a lot of things to discuss in the next 4 weeks. And if I were to simply try to explain the Reformation in its entirety, we would be here for a lot longer than 4 weeks. So brief. I highly suggest this not be your only exposure to the Reformation. I strongly urge you to read more about it. I think it's fascinating. It is also my job to be fascinated by it, so you win some, you lose some. First thing to know, why is October Reformation Month? Glad you asked. On October 31st, 1517, so 506 years ago, hot second, that is when the Reformation started. It began with Martin Luther nailing the 95 Theses to the door of a Catholic church, which that was actually fairly common practice. It's not like he was doing something completely out of the blue, like nobody had ever heard of this before. No, nailing arguments to a door was kind of the 16th century equivalent of posting something on your Facebook wall. I don't know. But it was common practice. He just simply started a reformation with his particular Facebook post. So that's special. Obviously Martin Luther is the main Reformation person. He's kind of the one that like jump-started everything and got things moving. He is not the first reformer. There were people before him that were like, hey, maybe the Catholic Church shouldn't do this. And then they were usually killed or excommunicated. So, that happens. A couple major players in the Reformation are John Calvin, John Knox, John Wycliffe, Jan Hus, John of Leyden, Johannes O'Clampadius. Sorry to all my theology professors there. And then a bunch of other guys that are named some form of John. And then there was also Philip Melanchthon. So those are the people of the Reformation. There were some other people, but those were the main ones. They're just assume they're named John. Okay? Half of them are named John. And the women, they're all Catherine. Except for the ones we're talking about today. But most of them, they're Catherine. All the guys are John. You think you're good. That's all you need to know. So that's the Reformation for you. Another thing that is important to note that I think not a ton of people tend to talk about, if you've ever seen the musical Six, or if you've ever seen or heard of the Tudors, this is the time period that they were around. And actually, they had a lot to do with the Reformation, especially, well, because you had King Henry VIII, okay? Awful dude. He had 6 wives. It was a nightmare. The first one was a Catholic, okay? She was Catholic. Her name was Catherine of Aragon. And then it was divorced. And then Anne Boleyn, she was a Protestant. We're going to get into that in a bit. Jane Seymour, who I don't really think she had any she just died was her thing. Like, she just died of natural causes, so that was her. And then you had divorced, beheaded, died, divorced. Okay, so then you had Anna of Cleves. She's a queen. I love her. Also a reformer, but we're not going to have time to get into her. Unfortunately, I love her. And then you had Catherine. I always forget her last name for some reason. I'm related to her. You would think I would know. She's also related to the Boleyns. So anyways, that Catherine. And then you had, finally, Catherine Parr. So again, 3 out of the 6 are named Catherine. Do you understand what I mean now? Everyone's Catherine. So anyways. They also, Anne Boleyn gave birth to Elizabeth, who would eventually become Queen Elizabeth I, which we're going to also talk about that in a little bit. So that is your incredibly brief history of the Reformation, including a summary of all of the wives of King Henry VIII. So there's that. I'm related to two of them. I'm related to the two that got beheaded. Now, I don't know what that says about me. Anyways, so we're talking about two women today because I don't think it would be fair to split them up. I think that they are a very strong pair, given that it's a mother-daughter duo. So we're going to start briefly with talking about who they were. Okay, so you have Marguerite. She was the Queen of Navarre, which doesn't exist anymore. That was a kingdom that got, like, I think it was Marguerite's grandson ended up, like, kind of combining Navarre and France, so it doesn't really exist. But it's like, the region was in the south of France. So she was the queen there. She was tutored really well throughout. Like, she was educated the same as her older brother, which is massive, given that in several parts of the world at that time, women couldn't even read. I'll say a lot of people just couldn't read at that point, but she had an incredible education. She almost married Henry VIII when she was 10, because it's the 1500s, 16th century, and she's a noble woman. So that happens, but that didn't end up working out. She married someone else, Charles IV of Alençon, who then died. So then she married Henry II of Navarre. Lots of names. You don't really need to know most of them. So that's when she had Jean III. She was frivolous and high-spirited. She was married to... This is so fun. I read this story, and I think it's hilarious because it sounds like something I would do, honestly. She was married to William the Rich, who was the brother of Anne of Cleves, who's the fourth wife of Henry VIII. She's a queen, in a very literal sense of the word, and also in, like, the metaphorical. I digress. She signed 2 documents and had members of her court sign documents that said that she objected to this wedding, she did not consent, and she will never consent, and she has never consented to this marriage. She had to be picked up and carried to the altar because she refused to marry this man. And it took them 4 years to annul the wedding, to annul the marriage. It was crazy. And I think at that point she was 12? 11 or 12, I think? Ridiculously young, but I digress. So then she married Antoine de Bourbon. Remember the Bourbon name, it comes up in a little bit. So both the women, very skilled authors, enjoyed writing poetry. Marguerite was more of a poet than Jean was, but still. So when it comes to the Reformation specifically, I'm gonna have to condense this a lot more than I would like to, because they're crazy. They are incredible. We're gonna do our best here. So like I said, Marguerite was a queen, so like she had money, and she was a really skilled poet, and she was highly educated. So she, in addition to financing several theologians, giving refuge to those fleeing religious persecution, including John Calvin. She was a friend of Calvin's, and corresponding to Erasmus, various popes, obviously Calvin, various other reformers like Marie Dentire, which I will learn how to pronounce her name for next week's episode, because that's who we are talking about. She was the godmother of Marie's daughter, the godmother of Marie's daughter. And Marie's daughter, sent, a French to Hebrew, I think, dictionary to, Marguerite's to Jean. So it's a whole thing. They were close friends, family friends. So she did all that, and she was a poet. And most famously, she wrote her poem, The Mirror of the Sinful Soul. That poem is over 1,400 lines long, so we will not be reading that right now. But that poem was condemned by Sorbonne theologians as heresy, which is always a slay. One monk even said that Marguerite should be sewn into a sack and thrown into the Seine. So needless to say, they weren't a huge fan of her work. That being said, we know for certain that a copy of the Mirror of the Sinful Soul ended up with the Tudor family. The way that it's assumed that happened is through Anne Boleyn. So Anne Boleyn, we know she had been a lady in waiting to Queen Claude, and we know that Claude and Marguerite had a lot of overlap in their courts, so it's likely that Anne Boleyn may have also been a lady in waiting to Marguerite, and so possibly, Anne Boleyn probably would have learned a lot about like Protestantism and the Reformation through Marguerite, who was talking to all these reformers, and therefore maybe Marguerite had given her the manuscript for Mirror of the Sinful Soul. Anne Boleyn marries King Henry VIII. Then Elizabeth ends up with it. And we know that it ended up there because Elizabeth I, when she was 11, translated that from French into English prose and presented it to her mother-in-law, who at that point they were on Catherine Parr. There were 6 wives in at this point. She had had 4 stepmothers by the time she was 11. So you can just let that one simmer for a bit. It's probably fine for her mental health, I'm sure. It'd be crazy if not. Anyways, Leonardo da Vinci died while staying with Marguerite. Doesn't have anything to do with the Reformation. I just think that is absolutely bonkers. So, do what you will with that information. Anyways, Erasmus, who was a Catholic theologian, said in a letter to Marguerite, and I quote, "For a long time I have cherished all the many excellent gifts that God bestowed upon you. Prudence worthy of a philosopher, chastity, moderation, piety, an invincible strength of soul, and a marvelous contempt for all the vanities of the world. Who could keep from admiring in a great king's sister such qualities as these, so rare even among the priests and monks?" Now, like I said, Erasmus, Catholic. So if she's a Reformation, like they don't really get along, which we will get into that in a moment, because that was a whole thing with Jean. She considered herself a Catholic. She was a reformer in the genuine sense of the word, where she wanted to reform the Catholic Church. She didn't want to change anything. She didn't want another schism like the one in 1054. She didn't want any of that. She just wanted the Catholic Church to return to its former glory, to return to the Word of God. She would not get her way, as we all know. That is also what Martin Luther wanted. He especially did not want a denomination named after him. But I digress. So, that was Marguerite. She also called herself the Prime Minister of the Poor. She did so much work with the poor and for the poor. She was really a wonderful woman, and that's kind of all I can fit in with the time we have right now. So, near the end of her life, she said, and I quote, "God, I am assured, will carry forward the work he has permitted me to commence, and my place will be more than filled by my daughter, who has the energy and moral courage in which, I fear, I have been deficient." Was that prayer answered, do you think? In good old Jean? Well, let's get into that. So Jean, both her parents died. That's when she officially publicly announced that she was converting to Protestantism, specifically Calvinism. They were both Calvinists, but we're not going to get into Calvinism versus Lutheranism. Both Reformations happened at the same time because of each other. That's all we care about at the moment. So she declared that conversion. In Bern, she ordered the confiscation of Catholic Church's property, and then took the ecclesiastical revenues, diverted them towards Protestant pastors' salaries, and then also towards an academy to train Calvinist clergy. Antoine de Bourbon, who was, again, Jean's husband, initially shared her enthusiasm for all of this, but then he kind of stopped tolerating it when the Calvinists started all their iconoclastic stuff, which is an entirely different episode. That is, we can talk about iconoclasm because I think it is important, and it's something that I want to research more anyways. Different story. Iconoclasm, basically, they do not think that any images should be made of God or Jesus or the Spirit, any member of the Trinity, at all, because it's a violation of the second commandment in their view. So when the Calvinists started with the whole iconoclasm stuff, and when they started desecrating the ancestral graves of the Bourbons, which is Antoine's family, that is when he got upset. So he dismissed all of the Protestant tutors that Jean hired for Henry, which is their son, sent the boy back to Paris, and then banished Jean to Berne. The conflict between the Protestants and the Catholics, and the Protestants at the time were called Huguenots. Why? I don't know. They're the French. Does anything the French do ever make sense? No. Literally never. Anyways, so the conflict there got to the point where they had a war. A full, not like the Toledo War. If you've never heard of the Toledo War, it's hilarious. No way I can spin that into a theological. Probably could spin it. I'm not going to. Look it up. It's super funny. The Wikipedia page is incredible. It wasn't like that war. It was like an actual war. And it lasted over 30 years, which is great. So in an oversimplification of events, because it was the 1500s, everything's going crazy, whatever. So Jean's husband died. She ended up heading up a war council, got Elizabeth I, who at this point was the queen, on her side, became basically the political head of the Protestant movement, encouraged Calvinist printers, and financed printing Bibles. She financed the printing of Bibles, tracts, other political broadsheets. She also subsidized translating the Psalms into the Béarnais dialect, which is one of the dialects of the regions in Navarre. And then she subsidized translating the New Testament into Basque, which is I think it's like a Creole that was in southern France. I think it is somewhat still used. I'd have to double check, but I'm not sure. So then she dies when she's about 40. So she lived a long, long life. But her death came in 17. Her death came in 1572. That would be a crazy long life. And it came when she was planning a marriage between her son and the younger sister of Charles IX, King Charles. This was the plan of Catherine de Medici, which is important because she was the one that helped Henry with the tutoring. She's very Catholic. It was designed, this wedding was designed to unite the Protestants and Catholics once more. Didn't really work super well, but, because war. But it was designed that way because that's how marriages worked. When you were a noble, you're not marrying for love, you're marrying for political reasons. But, so she died in Catherine de Medici's palace. And that caused a whole issue because the court physician said that she died of tuberculosis, but there were a bunch of rumors that Catherine poisoned her with gloves. I did not do a ton of research into that. I cannot definitively say if the rumors are true or if the court physicians are right. I don't know. People just died back then. 40 is kind of ancient for the Tudor days, so it was going to come at some point. It was just unfortunate timing, or it was a poisoning. Catherine, who knows? But the rumors ended up causing even more religious tension than the marriage was supposed to resolve, and it culminated in August, so few months after the death. And it culminated then with St. Bartholomew's Day, which was a massacre that left thousands of people dead. So, R.I.P. Jean. Sorry, that was what happened. She has been described as the most powerful Protestant woman and a Calvinistic Deborah, which I think are some really cool titles for her. You may be wondering what the title for this video means, and I'll explain it now. Obviously, the poet, I said a big descriptor word, polemic. I found it. There it is. So, polemic poet, obviously that's referring to Marguerite, but a little princess. Jean does not sound like a little princess. And you're right, but that is how she described herself. The King of Spain, Philip II, attempted to pressure her. I wasn't really able to find what he was pressuring her on. I think it had something to do with marriage, because I think he tried to marry her at one point. Everything's a mess. If it's like the royal families, just assume it's a mess. Everyone hates each other, but everyone also loves each other. It's ridiculous. But he was trying to pressure her to do something, and she responded, and I quote, "Although I am just a little princess, God has given me the government of this country so I may rule it according to his gospel and teach it his laws. I rely on God who is more powerful than the King of Spain." And that is why I chose to title her as a little princess, because those are the words that she used, and I think that is a killer quote. So that is my run through of Marguerite and Jean. Next week we are going to be talking about Marie, and then we have Olympia. I might be throwing one other person in there, and then we will discuss everyone's favorite reformed princess, Catherine von Bora. I love her. Okay, so I'm very excited for that, if you cannot tell already. I love October, Reformation month, always a good time. So I will see you guys next week, where we will continue this discussion. Let me know if you have any comments or questions down below. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments down below. That makes more sense. I will do my best to reply to them. I highly suggest you look up more information about these women, because I could not fit everything into this video, which I'm sad about because they're so cool, but I digress.